older adults are trying to help their aging parents deal with money. And joining me today to discuss that topic is Dana Anspach, founder and CEO of Sensible Money, who's had a lot of experience helping clients talk with their aging parents about money. Dana, welcome.
Hi, Bob. This is an interesting and challenging, sometimes even tricky topic. So I'm happy to be here to help share what we see.
Yeah, we're happy to have you walk us through what people can do. Let's start here. I often think that many people have trouble bringing up this topic with their aging parents, in part because it's long been viewed as a taboo topic.
It is. And there can also be just some emotional barriers, natural ones, to bringing it up, right? No one really wants to talk about passing. Maybe that feels uncomfortable. Maybe it feels like you might be seen as rushing the process along. I mean, nobody wants that. So it can be a very tricky and uncomfortable topic to bring up. We are lucky in that we work with retirees, and many of them in that age 60 to 75 age range are dealing with aging parents. And often it is the parent who brings the topic up. They may suddenly have trouble remembering if they paid a bill, or they might miss a tax return, or they might ask their, adult child to review their financial statements, their brokerage statements, something along those lines. And that can be a very natural entree to the conversation. But if they haven't brought it up, I think the question you're asking is, how do you bring it up, right?
Wow.
There's a few things you can do. If you have a financial advisor, even if you don't, you could say, I read this article online about some of the pitfalls that can happen when an estate passes along and how much it can cost. Would you be open to a conversation with me? And so you can start with a very open-ended type of question, bringing something up and just asking, would you be open to this type of conversation? I worry about you. I want to make sure everything's okay, and I want you to know I'm here to help. Would you be willing to go sit down with me and share your finances? So just start with an open conversation. If needed, you can, say your financial advisor requested it, or you read this article in a finance magazine, or you're reading a book about personal financial planning, and this is one of the steps they recommend. And that's probably the best place to start. See what happens.
Yeah. I'm thinking that a lot of times aging parents will say that they don't want to be a burden on their adult children. And yet by not having this conversation, they could become a burden at some point because the topics aren't discussed. I certainly wouldn't say to the adult child to say, hey, Dad, you don't want to be a burden on me, so let's talk about money. But that's the intent, right? That's what we need to get there.
That is the intent. And I mean, there would maybe be a different way of saying that in a way to say, I know you don't want to be a burden on me. I know you always want to make things easier on me. And this would be one way to do that. So you're kind of leading with perhaps some sentiment they've already expressed.
Yeah. What about in the cases where maybe the aging parent is resistant to talking about it? That they might say things like, it's all fine. I've got my money under control. It's none of your business.
That is the most challenging one. I think you can't push too far, right? You can share perhaps examples that you've heard even from this video and say, well, I've seen examples where people missed bills or tax returns weren't filed, or, somebody became the victim of fraud just because times are changing so fast. You could blame it on technology. Technology is moving so rapidly that I know, of course, you have it under control, but I just want you to know I'm here to help as things change so rapidly to make sure it stays that way. That might be, and if they absolutely refuse, there's not a lot you can do other than, if true cognitive decline is setting in, to go through the courts. And that's not a path anyone really wants to go down.
And it's a long and lengthy and possibly costly exercise. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm fond of quoting the FBI is noting that the number of older adults susceptible who are victimized by scams and schemes and fraud is on the rise. And it's probably even greater than what's been reported, because so much of it doesn't get reported. I'm curious, what can families do to protect their older adults from things like romance scams or tech scams or grandparent scams.
Crazy. I mean, the first thing is educate them, talk about it, you know, ask them about their technology savviness. That's probably not a real word, but it works in this case. I'll tell you about something we just saw that really caught us off guard. This is about an 80-year-old client, professional, highly intelligent, successful person who got a pop-up on his iPad that can't remember if they said the pop-up said it was Apple or Microsoft, but one of those, and that you needed to call the number immediately. Called the number. They ended up keeping him online and spinning this story, and eventually got him to go to an ATM, withdraw, it was at least $10,000, go to another ATM and deposit it. And this is a very intelligent person that somehow, got sucked into this scam from this simple pop-up on their device. So making sure that, maybe it's providing any articles you can find on cybersecurity, talking with your aging parents about, just make sure if you get any kind of pop-up or email, don't respond. I'm here to help you screen or vet these things to make sure they're legitimate. Those can be some starting places. It's crazy. Fraud is definitely on the rise, and with technology changing so rapidly, I mean, here in our firm, we get emails every single day that appear to be an invoice that's fake, or a software subscription that's renewing that we never had, or an email from me to my employees asking for something that isn't me. So it's a scary world out there. You really have to be savvy in your use of technology.
Yeah. Speaking of resources, I'm now listening to a podcast from The Economist called Scam Inc., where they talk about the very process of how older adults and even some middle-aged adults are getting scammed. And it's well worth, I would highly recommend everyone listen to it because it's an eye-opening experience. And I'd also suggest people go to the FBI site where they track this kind of thing. So to keep aware of things like romance scams, grandparent scams, and also become familiar with the term pig butchering, Dana, which is a term of art in the scam world.
Now, I've heard that term, but can you refresh my memory? What does that mean again?
Well, it's the process by which the scammer gets the victim's money. It's the process of feeding the pig, fattening the pig, and then slaughtering the pig. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of the common ones I've heard of, if someone starts a dialogue, they know a lot about you, maybe from social media, they start a dialogue, they sound caring and interested in your life, and you build up this trust with perhaps someone you've never met, never even talked to. And that is how a lot of these start. My husband had a cousin who lives in Australia, but had called us up and told us about this woman he had met here in the States, and how, she was going to be his wife and go over to Australia to join him, but needed money to, buy her plane ticket and so on. And we were just like, no, this is not real. But it didn't matter, right? That's the kind of bromance scams, this person, felt this connection, and they're masters at creating that sense of connection. And the cousin sent the money, and of course, never saw that money again.
Yeah. So I'm curious too, if you could comment on this. We're talking about being scammed and schemed by people you don't know, but more often than not, fraud is being perpetrated by people that the aging parent does know, family members and others of that sort.
Yeah, and that is absolutely terrifying. I'll tell you about two cases that come to mind. One was a friend of mine who was on the East Coast, I believe. Of course, I'll change all of the names, but let's say, mom lived somewhere around Pennsylvania, and he lived in, we'll say, Florida, and he had a brother who lived near mom. And because the brother was close, and I believe the brother was a professional, like let's say one was an attorney and one of the brothers was an accountant, for example, but both respected professions. And so mom names the brother that was close as, a signer on her accounts to help pay her bills. As she was getting older, she needed help. Well, that brother gradually drained all of the accounts. Now, the other brother, we'll call him George, my friend George, who lived far away, didn't discover this until mom passed. And so George ended up suing the brother because he had drained hundreds of thousands of dollars out of mom's accounts. And it was just, no one would have foreseen this. And it's sad when you hear these stories. I remember another case. It was a client we had, and she would help people with their tax returns. She worked for a big company in their tax department, but on the side, she just liked to help people with their tax returns. She had a neighbor who was not a high income earner, and she was helping file the return and had went and looked at last year. Well, the neighbor's sister had done the returns in the prior years and had always had what's called the earned income credit come back. It was a pretty big refund, but always lied to the sister and kept at least half the refund for herself and only sent the sister the other half. And it just, it was just crazy. So definitely there has to be trust there. Most people have a pretty good sense of, which of their relatives they can trust, but don't trust blindly.
Yeah.
It's always okay to have a second person. And this is why when families, we'd like a family meeting. So there's, more than one party involved.
Yeah. So speaking of family meetings, you do have examples of families that have gotten it right.
Believe it or not, that's more of the time, luckily, that we see that families do get it right, which is nice and a little bit reassuring. Some examples that come to mind, one of our longest standing clients, we'll call them the Stevensons, for example. And so, Mr. Stevenson began to experience cognitive decline and recognized it. He had always been extremely organized, paid his bills on time, began to miss some bills, went to his doctor. Mild cognitive impairment was the conclusion. Came to us and said, we want you to know, what should we do? And we said, let's schedule a family meeting. So they got all their adult children on. Some of them live across the country, but we were able to do a Zoom meeting and just walk through the finances. So, the kids know that you're okay. In their case, they have insurance in place if long-term care needs come up. They know who is named as the executor, the personal representative, who is the successor trustee. So just walking through what's in place and, all of the not details, but just big picture. Who are we? If something happens, we're here to help. Here's how you get in touch with us. And it was so useful. Everyone's on the same page. The kids aren't worried now, even though we call them kids. I mean, these were, mid-career adults, and they're worried about their parents naturally. And so that's an example of, definitely someone who did it right. I think another example that comes to mind, she was in her early 80s, widowed, and had one grown daughter. The daughter had 3 grandchildren. And she began to just, experience cognitive decline. They had a trust set up, and the daughter, we'll call the daughter Hannah. Hannah was named as a successor trustee, but mom would have to have been officially declared incompetent for that to take effect. Well, she wasn't officially incompetent, just, the decision-making wasn't as sharp as it used to be, and she was struggling with managing her finances. And so they went to the attorney together and said, well, let's add Hannah now as a co-trustee. And it worked beautifully. Now we could take instructions directly from Hannah, as well as the other financial institutions could take instructions directly from Hannah on any trust accounts. And there was no, controversy. If they had waited and the mom had begun to experience severe cognitive decline, mom might not have been in a state of mind to be okay with that change. But because they did it while everyone was fine and of sound decision-making, it was easy to add Hannah as a co-trustee, not have to go through the courts to prove that mom needed a co-trustee. So that's another example of families working together to proactively plan ahead.
Yeah. So a lot of older adults, aging parents may not have cognitive decline or cognitive impairment, but the research suggests that they may suffer from a decline in financial numeracy. And what are some of the common mistakes that you see, perhaps that could be attributed to that?
I think just understanding what your money could be doing for you, not having sound judgment about managing some basic finances. As an example, we had a client who came in. He was the power of attorney and successor trustee for his mom's estate. Mom was still alive in her 90s, doing just fine, but he brought her account statements in and said, would you just look these over for me? Is there anything I should be doing, since I also have access to these accounts? We looked, and one of the trust accounts was at Schwab, and there was almost $500,000 sitting in just cash, not interest bearing at all. And I said, you you have power of attorney. I said, do you have actually direct access to this account? And he said, yeah. And he said, the easiest thing you can do is just go in and place one trade, put this cash into a money market fund, and it's now earning $24,000 a year at whatever the current yields were at that point. They were over 4%, which they still are today. So there was a case of mom just, she didn't need the money. She didn't even understand all that cash was in there. Perhaps it had been in CDs or bonds that had matured over the years. She didn't really grasp that when those investments matured, she would need to do something with them. And so, you don't want to make any big changes for someone in their 90s. There's no reason to take a lot of risk, but something simple like just getting that money into a fairly stable interest bearing, security, that made a huge difference right there.
Yeah. So this has been incredibly helpful, I'm sure, to everyone who's watching and listening. But just to sort of go back for where we began, if someone isn't sure where to begin, where to start this conversation, what should they do?
Well, bring up the conversation, ask open-ended questions, ask mom or dad, would you be open to a conversation around your finances? Would you be open to a conversation just to make sure the whole family's on the same page, that we could look at everything, understand who could take over if you're not able to pay bills? Or would you be open to us, looking at your financial statements and making sure everything is in order? I think that's where I'd start. We've had so many clients bring in financial statements from their parents just to have us double check, right? And we're not going to change anything. We're just going to be double checking, is everything in order? And that, if done rightly, it should help bring everyone peace of mind.
And that's what we're all striving for, is peace of mind, especially when it comes to money. Dana, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. It's so greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob.